Chapter 4, RMS Titanic, Monday, April 15th, 1912, 12:30 a.m. Patty tried the French door leading to the Veranda Cafe. Locked. He kicked out one of his hobnail boots and, wielding it like a hammer, used the heel to smash one pane. Then he reached inside and flipped the lock. The door swung wide, and the group from steerage streamed inside. All urgency was momentarily forgotten as they took in the genteel elegance and luxury of the cafe, with its ivy-covered walls and immaculate crystal, silver, and china. The young mother crossed herself. Heaven itself must look like this. Heaven isn't sinking, Patty reminded her. Keep moving. A tuxedo-clad waiter stepped out of the shadows. You can't be here. This is first class. His eyes took in the punched-out pane and the glass shards on the floor. That's company property. Curran stared at him. Are you daft, man? There's a lot more broken than your fancy door. You'll have to pay for that, the waiter insisted. Patty laughed with humor. Tell the White Star Line to send me the reckoning. The group trailed through the veranda into the deep oak paneling of the smoking room. To their amazement, there were several elderly gentlemen, life belts over their evening clothes, puffing peacefully on pipes and cigars. Don't they know? Mrs. Rankin whispered. Patty shrugged. The rich are different. They passed from one sumptuous room to another, silent in their awe. Patty had become used to the splendor of first class, but the rest had never seen its like. It was a far cry from their Spartan accommodations aboard the ship and the homes they had left behind. Tiny cabins with dirt floors and smoky peat fires. They finally emerged beneath the third smokestack and found themselves absorbed in a scene of pure bedlam. Bedlam means craziness. Humanity teemed all around them, the world's rich and famous, and a bizarre assortment of clothing. Some still wore elegant evening attire. Others were in nightdress, complete with silk bathrobes and bedroom slippers. Most were wrapped in their furs, cloaks, coats, and even the blankets from their beds. If there was panic, it did not show. The general air was one of annoyance at the inconvenience of being roused from their sleep or dragged from their evening activities to stand in close quarters in the icy cold of the night. Snatches of conversation rose above the din. If this is a lifeboat drill, I think it is singularly ill-timed. No, that's not it. Some fool steered into an iceberg, and we've thrown a propeller blade. I expected better from Captain Smith. Why should I even dream of getting into an open boat where I can stay in my suite where it's warm and comfortable? This never would have happened on the Mauretania. I shall write a strong letter of protest to the White Star Line. Most bewildering of all was the presence of the orchestra from the first-class dining saloon. The musicians were assembled in the midst of the crowd, playing lively ragtime as if nothing were amiss. What's the matter with these people? Demanded Mrs. Rankin. Don't they understand that we're sinking? They probably don't believe it, Patty replied, raising his voice to be heard over the music. How can anything bad happen to you when you've got piles of money? They pushed through the throng to where Chief Officer Wilde was trying to help an elderly lady over the rail into a precariously balanced lifeboat. I cannot do it, and I don't see why I should, she shrilled. Madame, you must, said Wilde. It is the captain's orders. With a cry, she tumbled over the rail and into the wooden craft. Are there any more women and children? The chief officer called. Patty pushed Mrs. Rankin forward, and Wilde helped her into the boat. Her sons, Sean and Finbar, were lifted in after her, but the chief officer stepped in front of Aidan and Curran. Women and children first, he directed. They are my children, Mrs. Rankin cried. They may try for a later boat, Wilde insisted. Right now, the order is women and children. Mrs. Rankin's eyes widened in horror. It was a terrible dilemma. If she tried to keep her family together and took herself and her young sons off the boat, she might be dooming all of them. It's okay, Ma, Curran called. Don't worry about us. There'll be another boat. There you go, ma'am, Wilde assured her. Your boys have the right of it. You'll see them later. He waved to a fellow seaman who was approaching. Take over. Patty watched as the crowd parted and the new man arrived. It was Second Officer Lightoller, and that was bad news. Lightoller would recognize Patty as the stowaway he'd been chasing for days. Patty melted into the throng means like into the crowd, and worked his way forward, marveling at the absence of any sense of urgency. Were rich people really such fools? They were more put out by the bulky and unsightly lifebelts than the fact that the ship was sinking. The order is women and children only. came the odd Welsh accent of Fifth Officer Lowe in a warning tone. Patty turned back to see Kevin Gilhooly and his bodyguard Seamus attempting to board the fifth officer's boat. Not 20 minutes before, Patty had released these gangsters from a cell in the brig filled with water. He was still berating himself for doing so. He believed that the Gilhooly organization had murdered Daniel, his best and only friend in Belfast. And aboard the Titanic, they had made a deliberate and very nearly successful attempt to kill Patty. But to drown like rats in a cage? Patty had been unable to bring himself to let it happen, even to thugs like those two. Seamus held up a fistful of banknotes, but Lowe waved it away, insulted and outraged. "Stand away and wait like gentlemen." "If you won't accept an honest gratuity," Gilhooly shouted, "perhaps the favor of not throwing you over the side will make an impression." "You'll not board this boat unless God or Captain Smith himself orders it." The fifth officer reached into his uniform pocket and produced a small pistol. Seamus and Gilhooly backed off, and Patty stepped around a corner to avoid being seen. He had saved the two gangsters, but he still feared them. He found himself peering in one of the large gymnasium windows. To his surprise, the room was occupied, and by very distinguished company. Colonel John Jacob Astor, the wealthiest man aboard, sat with his wife on a small exercise bench. With a gold-handled pocket knife, he cut open a life belt and was showing his bride the cork inside, with a thought to the fact that some poor soul might need the now ruined belt. Indeed, the rich were different. Patty's thoughts immediately returned to the third-class general room. The hundreds of steerage passengers huddled like sheep. They had chosen to stay below and wait for their turn. With the likes of the Astors aboard, would their turn ever come?